We are here today with Professor Renato Lima de Oliveira, my co-author for The Job is Easy, The People Are Not. And today we're going to talk about humility, one of my top 10 smart skills. And I have to say, it took me a very long time to realize that humility is a very hard and important skill to develop. And when I think of Renato, I think of somebody who is outstandingly humble. Let's learn why. Renato, welcome.
Thank you so much, Professor Loredana. It's a great pleasure to be here, to be sharing a little bit on that topic, although it's extremely challenging to be identified as humble and to talk about it. But I take the challenge.
So when I asked Renato to help me on this book project and I asked him to think about humility, he said, I don't think I'm the right person. I don't think I'm good enough for this project. But in itself, it was a lesson in humility. So let's start with a very simple ask. What is your definition of humility?
I think I would relate back to history and even how we as a society we have developed, right? Because when we move from self-sufficiency to operating in different communities and then to grow a society, it becomes more complex. So you cannot do things just by yourself. You need the cooperation of others because skills and knowledge gets dispersed. And that puts me back to Socrates saying that I know that I know nothing. It's a recognition that we depend on others. And when you realize that, you know that, hey, you cannot be arrogant. You need to operate with your fellow colleagues because that's vital for you to achieve even your own goals.
You know, it's interesting you said this about the quote. I remember getting my PhD. And the day when I graduated, I was thinking, oh my God, I know nothing. Actually, the more I know, the less I know. And I really felt like, I need you to take me back to school. Don't let me out there, because I thought I knew everything before I had to submit my thesis. And the second I did, I was like, I actually know nothing. I shouldn't be there. It's a danger for me to be out there. So let me ask you this. Can you think of a situation in your professional career, in your organizations, when you think that humility brought a really big impact to the organization? And I have to say, I'm going to tell everybody, you know, I'm still taking notes. I'm still learning. If you see me taking notes during this interview, it's because I really want to learn more about this amazing skill. So I already made like 5 comments just in the first sentence. But thinking of humility, what is a positive impact example you can think of?
I think that's a great example about doing a PhD, and it is such a challenging moment in life. And for people who are outside of academia, it's even very hard to understand. Why would you take so many years to study about sometimes something that looks so narrow to people from outside? And when you do that, it's not that you might get out with a title or a PhD and so on, or you might join a faculty of a university and be a professor. But in reality, deep down, you know that you need to constantly learn new things to be updated. You've done a trajectory of studying, of doing research, of coming up with a novel work. But if you just stop, if you don't read the journals, if you don't talk to practitioners, you are quickly outdated. So to some extent, I think a lot of students, when they do their PhD, they have an existential crisis. It's like, am I the right person to do that? Because it's tough, it's challenging. So I think that attitude of always seeking to learn, recognize your own deficiencies, your own skills gap, and try to address them, and now also to help develop others, it is a lesson in humility. And I also connect that to our own mission, ASB, Asia School of Business, as a new business school located in Asia, and with a mission to develop principled and transformative leaders to advance the emerging world. So emerging markets, it's a key thing in our mission. But emerging markets are very different from each other.
Absolutely.
They are very heterogeneous.
Yeah, you can compare Brazil to, Malaysia,
or Vietnam, or Zambia, or Thailand. Each one, they have their own characteristics, their own institutions. So even when we develop coursework or when we engage with action learning hosts, we need to learn a lot because You cannot just
Even
copy.
we as faculty, right?
Yes, yes. And when we deal with students that come from all over the world, they teach us a lot about their own reality. We cannot just take even material that reflects what works in US or what works in Europe and say that, yeah, that's how you should manage your company in this market.
Applied, right?
Yeah, so you always need to think about and to have another smart skills. You need to have a lot of critical thinking ability to understand, to read things, and then critically engage with it and convert to the reality of each place.
You know, as you were talking, I was thinking when we first came to Asia, and you know, when our president and the MIT leadership decided to make this happen, I think immediately they said we're not going to just copy paste the model from MIT to ASB because it's not going to work. I mean, we're talking about a very different playground, and I think there's a lot of misplaced arrogance in assuming that, oh yeah, what works there is going to work here. Or I remember being part of a project with an Action Learning host, and we were in Cambodia, and the Action Learning host headquarters were in Germany, and they said that do the same thing you did in Thailand in Cambodia, and we're like, but it's not the same country. And he kept saying, but it's the same thing. I was like, have you ever been here before? No, but how different can it be? So this idea that you know a little, therefore you know a lot is so dangerous, right? It's like, I think this is how a lot of bad decisions are made today. You're just assuming that what works here works there. And it's very much what you said. The more I know, the less I know, and therefore I constantly have to learn.
Yeah, and you... It's kind of, you have to recognize what are the moving parts, what are the variables, why something that can work in Germany might face issues in Cambodia. So you might have a totally different institutional structure or human resource or even aspirations of different managers on the ground. So all of that means that you cannot take things for granted. You need to learn, you need to really try to understand.
I think of you as somebody who's extremely humbled. I mean, you are so well educated. You have the credentials. You're an MIT PhD. But at the same time, you're somebody who is constantly hungry for knowledge. You learn more than any other. You spend more time on the ground than with the students. How did you develop this skill? How did you become so humble? Were you born this way? Can we learn how to become more humble?
Well, I think it's again, it's quite challenge to represent that.
Try harder.
Yeah, but I can relate to two things. One is my own mother used to always tell me, do not be self-sufficient. She used to always say that self-sufficient people do not get ahead in life. They are unable to reach out to ask for favors and recognize their own gaps to be addressed. And also, before going to academia, doing a master's PhD and start teaching, I was a journalist. I worked in a newspaper, in a big newspaper, covering business.
In Brazil?
In Brazil. And one of the fascinating aspects of the profession is that most days you are learning something new.
Yeah,
you're
absolutely.
talking to people. Right, you specialize in some areas, so you can cover financial sectors and you can be more dedicated to something. However, lots of time you have to cover. Someone is on vacations, or you need to cover things that are outside of your comfort zone.
Right?
Yes.
In a way.
In that, I can definitely relate that. For example, Loredana, I remember going to cover a public hearing of the CEO of a large power utility company. And he was talking about different investment plans and the tariff and other things. And everything of that was new to me. Even the metrics used, how many megawatt hours is going or these new transmission lines and so on. And when I returned to the newsroom, I had to double check every information. I needed to know if everything made sense, if I was correctly conveying the message and be critical about it. Because above all, journalists has to be accurate.
Yeah.
But
The good ones.
Yes. In order to be accurate, especially because I was not an expert in the field, I needed to double check, to talk to other source, and so on. And guess what? Later, that gave me so much of an interest about this particular field that during my master's and my PhD, I studied energy markets. So that's one of the fields that I teach now.
Yeah, you're a master of energy. I remember, speaking of energy, I was with my students in Boston a few years ago, and we were visiting a company in this field. And the CEO came to talk to our students, and he was using very, very technical language. And none of my students were very sure what he was saying, but none of them were humble enough to ask the question, because for me, humility is also very close to confidence, because you need to be really, really confident to be humble to say, I don't know. So after the CEO goes on and talks for 30 minutes about very, very technical things, one of my students finally raises his hand and he says, excuse me, could you please maybe go back and tell us what the grid is, right? Which is the basic of understanding. But for me, that was such a moment of confident humility. And I know it sounds like a contradiction in terms, but I actually think that you need to be really, really humble to be confident, to admit that you don't know what you don't know, right? I remember Professor Bob Merton from MIT, who's a Nobel Prize laureate, and he's teaching at ASB too. I asked him once, I said, Bob, what is it like to have a Nobel Prize? And he said, it felt really good for a second, and then I realized I only have one. There's people who have two. And I was like, wow, you're all right. One is not enough because there are people who have two, right? So that's really interesting. So when I think about your approach to humility, is this generalizable? Can we teach others? Can we teach our students how to be humble? Can we learn from you?
Yeah, I think it is generalizable in the way that how do we approach that, even as a way of life? As you said, it's important to ask questions and recognize when you do not know, because that's the only way you can get out of a situation like that and learn something. Otherwise, you would spend half an hour there, you would be turned off, and you would just not learn. And that would not be good for you, and also not be good to the speaker. And there would be a lack of engagement there. But I also think that it relates to other societal issues. So in generalizability, when I think about being humble, I also think about the toxic combination of arrogance and ignorance. Which is so common, particularly in authoritarian countries. Right? Because you have a situation where you have some political leaders who do not face checks and balances. They are surrounded by the so-called yes men. And that is very toxic. So how do you relate that to our own day-to-day jobs if you are not ruling a whole country?
Which I'm trying to at some point.
Yeah, so maybe we'll get there. So I think it's important to work in environments where you are constantly challenged, right? That you're not surrounded by people who are just agreeing with you, right? There's also issues of group thinking and so on. So when you are challenged, you try to become a better person. You work harder. And I think that's critical.
And that's, I think, one of the reasons why I love this field. I mean, this is my 19th different profession. So I had a lot of careers prior to this, including a little bit of journalism. And when I enter accidentally academia, I always call myself an accidental academic. I realized that while it doesn't feel that good anymore not to be the smartest person in the room, it's also an opportunity to constantly try to be one. And I was just taking notes as you were talking, about arrogance and ignorance. And I always tell my students, arrogance and ignorance are best friends because they feed off each other. You cannot be arrogant unless you're ignorant about the little that you know. And I also tell them that confidence should always come from competence. That one should never be confident without it. Because otherwise you're just arrogant, feeding on this, ignorance, if you want. So speaking of our students, speaking of the people that we work with, speaking of the title of this book, which is The Job is Easy, the People Are Not, how do we assess smart skills in others. So, see, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this project is because, first of all, we used to call these skills soft, which I don't think it's appropriate because there's nothing soft about them. But I also hear this all the time, including today. I was part of an interview, and somebody said, "I teach soft skills, and you know that we cannot assess them." And I was like, we cannot assess that somebody's humbled or cognitively ready or that has great followership skills. So do you know how to assess smart skills? Can we assess smart skills?
I think so. Let me provide one tentative answer for that, which is who would you want to work with? And how the answer to that can vary according to the complexity of what you're going to do. So if you're going to engage in a long-term and complex project, I think it's critical to work with people to develop a team that can work in sync, can be synchronized, and that requires people with humility, with ability to learn, and not being arrogant. Yeah. If you're going to work in simple projects that are short-term, almost transactional in nature, like spot transactions, that's fine. You can deal with someone that you might not trust, that you might not look up to, but that can be done. But to achieve really complex goals, yes, the ability to relate to each other is critical because you build trust, you build reciprocity, you learn from each other.
I was reflecting and writing down when you were speaking. When we first started ASB, I remember our president saying, "The world is full of smart and arrogant people. I prefer to work with the smart and humbled ones." And when I think about how we actually recruit students and staff at ASB, humility is one of our values. And a lot of people are very confused about why would you want to recruit a humbled MBA, because it's the opposite, right? It's almost like an oxymoron. Let's be very honest. MBAs are famous for being overly confident, right?
Yeah.
But I think what gives you an immediate reality check is what you said before in one of your previous answers. Coming to a new environment, to a new territory where you realize that the more I know, the less I know, it gives you a massive humility check. And I also think being surrounded, so what? ASB has over 45 nationalities. For a company of 200 people, it's insane. Like every third person is from somewhere else in the world. So that also gives you a massive, I think, reality check in humility. So I'm gonna ask you this final question. I have a lot more to ask you, but thinking of others, and maybe even thinking as yourself as a leader, what are your aspirations when it comes to smart skills?
Yeah. I think my aspiration, in more broadly, aspiration in life, is to be someone that helped others develop their full potential. And that is particularly joyful as a faculty, right? Because we teach people, we sometimes guide their career, and we become really happy to see how much they can achieve, what they can do in life, how many lives they can change through their good work. So that is part of it, and also our research and policy engagement. I want to help the world become a better place and become a more sustainable place through research and also through policy engagement. So to make sure that research is communicated, that it's able to be translated into better policies. So I think what would make me happy.
It makes you happy to make other people happy, to bring joy in other lives.
Make sure that they achieve their goals.
And I think that's why our job is the best job in the world, because we get to learn for a living, we get to teach others for a living, and then we get to see what amazing impact they have once they leave our little nest here.
Yeah, but it's not an easy one. We have to constantly learn. We have to, it's like biking, but unable to ever stop.
Well, and that's why I guess humility is a prerequisite for success.
Yeah, endurance and humility.
Endurance and humility. And with this, ladies and gentlemen, this was a masterclass in humility by none of the other Renato Lima de Oliveira. This is the Job is Easy, the People Are Not project. We're going to come back with another masterclass in another smart skill. Thank you for today. Today, we talked about humility, because remember, If the job is easy, the people are not, it's our responsibility to become better people.